Hey there, fellow editors. Andrew Swan here, and today I'm going to revisit a video tutorial I did about a year ago about how to use AVISynth, QTGMC, and FFMPEG to do really high quality deinterlacing of standard definition interlaced video. It was time for an update because a number of the programs involved have had small to significant updates. I've actually changed around a program or two to something different, and I've figured out a bunch of different settings changes that have made the process overall both more stable and faster. However, this time I'm going to be breaking up the tutorial into two parts. The first is going to be just a beginning to end soup to nuts version of the process where I show you where to download everything, how to install and set up all the different individual components, and write sort of the scripts that you need. Once you've done that process once, you don't have to do most of the setup stuff again. So the end of this video will cover just going over a really simple version of the deinterlacing process. In another video, as a follow-up, I will show you how to do some slightly more advanced stuff within AVISynth itself, like cropping and then resizing a standard definition video so it'll fit in a high definition frame, how to do sort of different installs of the various programs that might make them easier to work with for particular workflows, and sort of a bunch of other random stuff as well. I should also mention that I'm coming at this from the perspective of a video editor, which means that I'm going to be exporting out a ProRes file at the end. If you are looking to deinterlace something like a DVD and then throw it on your phone or something like that, then you should probably look elsewhere. There are way easier ways to do that, and most of you probably aren't going to care about the quality difference. I recommend Handbrake for something like that. However, for those of you who are left and are ready to dive into this, because this is definitely going to be a little more involved than just downloading a program and running it, a couple of cautions before we begin. I make no guarantees that this process will be stable on your system. I make no guarantees that this process will be free of viruses. Please virus scan everything before loading it onto your system. If you have any doubts about whether or not you are free to sort of bork your system, don't do this. Go and grab a professional plugin like, I'm going to do a little plug for Fields Kit here. They're not paying me to do this or anything like that. It's a single plugin that you can drop into Premiere Pro, After Effects, or Final Cut Pro that will do essentially the same thing. It does cost about $90, but if you're working on a multi-million-dollar production or something, it's probably better to work with something that has a tech support email. So just keep that in mind. Also, I have a blog. This is Andrew's personal blog. The address is macelatthefront.blogspot.com. There'll be a link to it in the video description below, as well as the first pinned comment. I have text versions of all the tutorials that I do up there, including this one, which you can see on screen right now. Any sort of minor changes to the process will show up there rather than me doing like a whole separate video on it. So if there's any sort of confusion, go there first. It's also got links to all the various files, so you don't have to remember where they are or just, pause the video constantly to follow along with me. So with all that being said, let's get started. First thing we're going to grab is AVISynth. Now, in the past, I recommended using the 2.6 single-threaded and multi-threaded builds of AVISynth. Those are getting really long on the tooth now, and AVISynth Plus, the fork of AVISynth, has gotten a lot better. to the point where now it actually has a speed advantage. And it's, as far as I can tell, pretty stable. So I'm going to recommend that you grab AVISynth Plus, which you can do by going onto the AVISynth homepage at avisynth.nl and grabbing the latest release under AVISynth Plus, which goes to their GitHub page. You don't need this VC redist thing. I believe it's only for debugging. You should be just fine with the plain version here. Okay. After that, you're going to need to grab all the various plugins that we'll be using with AVISynth. And those will be under this external filters page because AVISynth chooses to call their plugins either plugins or filters, but they mean exactly the same thing. It's one of a number of quirks of AVISynth. You'll see a few more of them as we go along. Anyway, we're going to start with a source filter, and that will be FFMPEG Source. There are a bunch of others on here, but FFMPEG Source uses FFMPEG to open up files, so it's compatible with a really wide range of stuff, and I think it's updated a bit more frequently as well, too. It does have a couple of minor limitations with sort of these edge case types of video, but you will see what those are if you just go to the page and look under limitations and known issues. It should not be a problem for most people. Okay, go ahead and grab that from the download link and go back to the external filters page. And under restoration filters, go down to where it says Deinterlacing. Click on that and click on QTGMC. QTGMC is the special sauce. It's the plugin that actually relies on a bunch of other plugins to do really, really high quality deinterlacing. So you'll need to grab the QTGMC plugin itself from up here under the download link. And then you're going to grab all of these core plugins. Now, technically, you can also grab all of these optional plugins and stuff, but for this tutorial, you do not need those. Okay? So, Mass Tools 2, MV Tools 2, don't worry if it says with dpans, it's the same thing. NEDI 3, RG Tools, and then finally SMDGrain is a script. So this is actually on a pastebin link, which you can grab by going over next to this raw link here and clicking on download and just do save file. We're going to have to change the 3-letter extension at the end, but we'll get to that in a sec. Then before we leave this page, you'll need to go down to the sneaky bit down here at the bottom where you see this FFT W3 library. Click on the Windows Builds link next to that and grab the 32-bit version. Whenever there's a choice during this process of what version of a software to use between 32-bit and 64-bit, in some cases, it'll be called x86 and x64. Always use the 32-bit version. So, you might have noticed along the way here that a couple of these archives are in 7-zip. If you do not have a program already to extract 7-zip archives, you can grab one from www.7-zip.org. And just go ahead and grab the 64-bit version. It makes no difference, but might as well. Okay. Then we're going to go back to the main AVISynth page and click on the Utilities link. And we're going to grab BSP Mod, which is a text editor for AVISynth scripts. I'll tell you more about that in a sec. However, you're not going to grab the one from the main link. because that is a little out of date and does not work well with AVISynth Plus. Instead, we're going to go to the latest build, which is at the end of this line here, where it says latest build can be found here. So click on the here and grab the 32-bit version of BSP Mod. Okay. Then finally, we're going to grab the Windows build of FFMPEG, which is on FFMPEG.0no.com. This is the page of the unofficial maintainer of Windows binaries for FFmpeg. The main FFmpeg page only really has source code available for download. So just in case there's any confusion there, you're going to want to grab the latest nightly version, which is this longer number, 32-bit architecture, static linking, and download build. All right. So once you've grabbed all that, then virus scan everything I just told you to download. And don't blame me if something borks your system, as I told you that it might. Okay. I use VirusTotal. You can use whatever you want, although I would recommend using VirusTotal plus some other antivirus program locally installed on whatever computer you're downloading this to. So to install all this stuff, go to our downloads folder and double click on AVISynth Plus. It'll come up with the little account prompt, and then when you click through that, we're just going to go OK, next, I accept, next, next, install. Okay, and then finish. Once that is done, the next step will be to go to the directory where AVISynth installed, which is going to be under Program Files x86, AVISynth Plus, and then we're going to the Plugins Plus directory. And this is where we're going to dump all of our plugin files. So going down the list, we're going to start with FFMPEG Source. It is a 7-zip archive, so if you don't have something that's capable of opening 7-zip already, then go ahead and install 7-zip first and then come back to this. Okay, but open it up. Open up the folder and go to the x86 folder and grab ffms2.dll. And you're going to start to see a pattern emerging with this. Then Mass Tools 2. Once again, x86. Mass Tools 2. MV Tools 2. x86 folder. MV Tools 2. You don't need any of the other DLLs in there. N83. x86 folder. This one is going to have a choice that you will actually have to look into a bit. Basically, it will depend on what instruction sets your processor supports. If it supports AVX2, you go with that one. AVX, you go with that one. None of the above, you go with the plain release_W7. I happen to know that my processor supports AVX, so I will extract that one. I believe most processors from the last couple of years should support AVX2. Just if there's any doubt, go and download CPU-Z, use that, and that will tell you what instruction sets your processor supports. Okay. So, N83. QTGMC, which you will notice is one of these .avsi files. RG Tools, go to the x86 directory and extract out RG Tools. You do not need any of the other files that are in these archives. Those other files are optional. Then finally, for SMDGrain, we're going to change the 3-letter text extension to .avsi. If you do not see a 3-letter extension after SMDGrain, then what you're going to want to do is go to your Start menu, type in Folder, click on the File Explorer options, go to the View tab, and uncheck Hide Extensions for Known File Types, and hit OK. All right. We're going to need to do this because we're going to need to rename a number of the files in this tutorial with different extensions. So in this case, just go ahead and right-click, click on Rename, and then change the .txt to .avsi. Yes. And copy that over to the plugins directory, because you're going to want to hang on to all of these downloaded files in case you need to recreate this for some reason. All right? All right. Before we go on to installing the rest of the stuff, however, we need to do the FFT W3 library install, which you can get to by going to your main drive, Windows, syswow64, scroll down until you get into the files here. All right, now open up your FFT W3 archive. And we're going to do the most arcane part of this setup, which is copy over libfft w3f-3.dll. None of the other files in that directory. That's pretty straightforward, but what you'll also need to do is take the same file, drag it out again, preferably to somewhere else, right-click on it, rename it, and call it in all caps FFTW3.dll. Okay, then move that over to your syswow64 directory. Okay, that concludes the setup for AVISynth. Now, we're going to install BSP Mod, which is pretty simple, really. You double-click to open it up. BSP Mod already has its own sort of directory set up. You can just drag it out to wherever you want, and, that's it. In this case, I'm actually going to remove that because I have a copy already set up in my miscellaneous AV tools folder here. So, but you can set it up on your desktop or on your documents folder, wherever the heck you want to put it is fine. You're rarely going to be opening it up directly, and I'll show you why in a sec. Okay, then finally, FFMPEG, you can install the easy way just by double-clicking on it, opening up the FFMPEG folder, going to the bin folder. Okay, then open up the folder where your video file is that you want to deinterlace, and copy over the FFMPEG.exe binary to that folder. In the advanced video, I'll show you how to do this so that you can copy FFMPEG to one place and then have it run from any directory on your system. But for now, this is the quick and easy way. So, alrighty. With that, we are pretty much ready to go. So, first thing we're going to create, we're going to do a new text document, and I'm just going to call this test for today, but we're going to change the 3-letter extension to .avs. And you might notice that your file does not have this icon right away. In order for it to get that and to open up automatically in BSP Mod, we're going to right-click on it, go to Open With, choose another app. Check Always Use this app to open AVS files, then click on More Apps, scroll down, look for another app on this PC, click on that, and go to wherever you have AVSP Mod installed. Select avspmod.exe, click on Open, and in a moment, AVSP Mod should open. I'm going to make one recommendation, which is to go into the Options menu, go to Program Settings, and go to Autocomplete and uncheck Show Autocomplete with Variables and Show Autocomplete on Single Matched Lowercase Variable. Basically, this will just prevent AVSP Mod from auto-completing and dumping a bunch of variables when you type out a command. But it's kind of up to you. All right, we're going to start our script by invoking the multithreading mode for specific plugins. This is actually a difference between AVISynth Plus versus the old AVISynth. In the old AVISynth, you would set an overall mode, and whatever plugins were multi-threaded would just automatically work with that mode until you changed it sort of top to bottom in the script. In this case, you're going to do set filter MT mode. And in parentheses, you're going to put the name of the plugin in quotes, so QTGMC, a comma, and 2, as in the number 2. And that will tell AVISynth to put QTGMC specifically in multi-threaded mode 2. All right. For any other additional plugins that would use multi-threading, you would put another set filter MT mode command with that plugin in quotes and a multi-threaded mode number. All right. Next up, we're going to load our video file using FFMPEG Source 2. Note the way this is spelled. The first letter of every word in AVISynth commands are always capitalized, and then the rest of the word is lowercase. So FFMPEG, you have 2 capital F's, MPEG, capital S, and then the rest of source, and then the number 2. All right. Same sort of deal here. In parentheses, put the name of your video file in quotes. Real easy way to do this is just to right-click on the video file, click on Properties, and just select and copy the name. Go back into AVSP Mod and paste it in. So you put the name of the video file in quotes, then a comma, then a space, then a track equals 1. Technically, there are some video files out there that would have multiple audio tracks. The most common ones you're going to run into are like if you have an extracted DVD file, or if you have a file that was made for distribution to, I don't know, international TV markets or something, where you have like the standard fully mixed down audio, and then you have separate music and effects stems or something like that on additional tracks. If you have those, then you might need to switch to a different track depending on what you want to do with the video here. But for most people, a track equals 1 should be fine. Okay, after that, we're going to do convert to YV12, and you just put the parentheses. You don't need to put anything in that. For QTGMC to work, you need to convert to YV12 color space. All right, now this is probably a good point to actually just load up the video file and make sure that everything is working. One of the reasons why you use AVSP Mod here versus like Notepad is that AVSP Mod has a built-in video preview function. So you can see down here there's like playback buttons and a long playback bar. Just click anywhere in the playback bar And in anywhere from a couple of seconds to a minute or two, your video should show up. So you kind of scrub around a little bit here and just see what everything looks like. Let me see if I can find a place where there's some really obvious interlacing here. Yeah, if you kind of zoom in a bit, you can see how this image is got some nasty interlacing going on. And you'll also notice down here that it's showing up as 29.97 frames per second. That's good. That's where it should be at this point. All right. In order to deinterlace within AVISynth, we first have to let AVISynth know which field order the interlacing is done in. As in, is it a top field first or a bottom field first? Like, is the first line in the interlaced field at the top of the frame or the bottom of the frame? You do that by doing assume TFF or assume BFF for top and bottom. Okay? I'm going to actually intentionally get this wrong so that you can see what it looks like when you mess this up. But general rule of thumb is that consumer video tends to be bottom field first. Professional video tends to be top field first. Also, high definition interlaced video is pretty much universally top field first. Now, time for QTGMC. QTGMC has an absolute ton of options, but I'm just going to show you the basics here. So, in parentheses, we're going to do preset equals slower, in quotes, then comma, space, then eddy threads equals 1, then close parentheses. Eddy threads can work just fine with this default of 1. If you want to try and get a very small speed boost, what you can do is find out how many cores you have in your system and then do half of that number as the number of eddy threads. You can find that by going to Task Manager, go to the Performance panel, and go down here, and you'll notice we got 6 cores on my processor, as well as 12 logical processors, which will come into play in a moment here. Previously, I would have renders just sort of freeze up, and one of the things that made the rendering process more stable was by going in here and reducing the number on eddy threads. So, but for now, I'm just going to set it to eddy threads equals 3, which is half of my 6 cores. All right. Now let's make sure that we're actually doing this right. So to refresh the image again, just go to where the playback head is and click on it. And you can use the left and right arrow keys on your keyboard to advance forward and back through the video file. So, oh, look at that. They're doing Ministry of Silly Walks motion here. Yeah, there's a little twitchiness going on. And that generally means that you've gotten the field order wrong. So, in this case, I will change the assume TFF to assume BFF. Refresh. And look at that. Nice, smooth motion. Now, looking down here in the bottom right, you will note that the resolution is 720 by 480, and the frame rate is 59.94 frames per second, which is the NTSC variant of 60 frames per second. So if you see that, you're good. If you're doing this in PAL or something like that, then you would be starting with 25 frames per second, and the deinterlace would also frame double up to 50 frames per second. Okay? So at this point, you know, you've got a workable image, but you might notice something. Looking at an interview shot like this, you might notice that Jake's looking a little squashed. That's because standard definition video has a different so-called pixel aspect ratio than modern video does. The reasons for that are too weird to get into here, but basically you were playing back standard definition video on a display that would have an image that was slightly stretched vertically. It's really easy to correct for this though. We're going to do that with a resize. Okay, so AVISynth has a bunch of different resize methods. They kind of correlate to the same ones that you find in a lot of image editing programs. So it's like bilinear, bicubic, Lanczos, or however you pronounce that thing, and the spline resize methods, which I believe is spline 16, spline 32, and spline 64. If you just want to do a simple resize, rule of thumb is that bilinear resize is a good one to use because it doesn't add any sharpening to the original image. So if you want to do the least messing around with the image possible, then this is a good one to use. All right. So I'm going to go to 720, 540. And look at that. Jake is now his correct aspect ratio. Now, that might be fine for what you want to do. If you're going to take this video file and send it off to a streaming service, for example, you might not want to use 720 by 540. I know that several online video streaming services tend to prefer that standard definition content is sent in 640 by 480, which would be the lower resolution equivalent of this. It's the same aspect ratio either way. You just go 640, 480. And there you go. Also, if you were sending off directly to a video streaming service, some of them do not accept 60 frames per second content. They'll require you to either send in 29.97 frames per second content, or they'll do it themselves. If you want to do it before you send it out, then in the QTGMC command line here, add in FPS divisor equals 2, and then a comma and a space. And then if you do that, you will notice that down at the bottom right hand corner you get 29.97 frames per second. However, personally, I like to leave it at 60 frames per second, resize to 720 by 540, and that becomes my new video master for the footage, so that I can go and then make different versions off of that. That way you retain the full image detail and frame rate of the original content. So one other thing that you might need to do is if you've got a noticeable black bar like here, and let's say this actually did appear throughout the entire program, you would need to use the crop command to remove that, which you can do by just doing crop and then 4 numbers: left, top, right, bottom. Okay. In this case, since it's on the right, it's going to be this 3rd number over. One of the other many quirks of AVISynth is that the crop command has positive numbers for the left and top and negative numbers for the right and bottom. So in this case, I know that 4 off of the right will take care of that line, but you can play around with it and see what works. Now, if you need to return this to a different size after that, then you can do another resize command. If you have an image that's not particularly heavily compressed or doesn't have a lot of noise in it already, then this might be the time to do a sharpening resize method. So when I want to do a sharpening resize, I will generally tend to use spline 64 resize. Okay. And I'm just going to bring it back to 720, 540. It'll very slightly stretch out the image if you're doing a minor correction like that, but it's not enough to really be a huge issue. Anyway, I'm pretty happy with that. However, if you want this to run at more than like 10 frames per second, you're going to also need to tell AVISynth how many threads you want to dedicate to this process. And that you do by adding in the prefetch command, which will be 10 in my case, and I will show you why in a moment. So, remember when I told you to go to Task Manager to look at the number of cores? If you go back there and you go to that same place, the Performance tab, the CPU item, and look down here where it says cores 6 and logical processors equals 12. If those two numbers are different, that probably means that you have some sort of hyperthreading or whatever AMD's equivalent is enabled on your processor. It means that it will take one core and use it as two, sort of in software. It's kind of like virtual cores that you add. You generally want to set prefetch to a number less than the total number of logical processors, like 1 to 2 less or something. In my experience on my system, going with 10 works for me out of 12 logical processors. So if you run into some weird issues with stuff crashing, or you get a really nasty speed bottleneck, or the render freezes up, which again can be a common thing with QTGMC in particular, then change eddy threads first and prefetch after that. And you actually don't need this sort of threads equal thing on there. You can just do prefetch 10 and it works just the same way. All right. Okay, so save your script. Please do that. Close it. And then we're going to create new text document. And I'm just going to call this test again, but instead of txt, we're going to call it test.bat. That's a batch file. Okay, we're going to right click on it, click on edit, and now we're going to type in our FFMPEG command, which is pretty simple. FFMPEG space -i, the name of your AVISynth script in quotes. Okay, so in this case it's test.avs. Then -c:\v space, and then the video codec that you're going to be using. In this case, I'm going to be selecting ProRes. Then for ProRes, you want to select what sort of subcodec of ProRes you're going to use, which you can do by doing -profile:\v, a space, and then a number between 0 and 3. 0 is ProRes proxy, 1 is ProRes LT, 2 is ProRes 422, and 3 is ProRes 422 HQ. I would only recommend ProRes 422 or 422 HQ for professional work. The others are only really good for sort of proxy workflows. So in this case, I'm going to go with 3 for 422 HQ, which should give me the best quality. Technically, there is another ProRes encoder in FFmpeg that you can enable by doing ProRes_KS instead of ProRes. It provides more options in terms of quality, and it can also support ProRes 444, but you're probably not going to be using ProRes 444 coming off of a 420 color space video file. It's kind of a waste of hard drive space. And ProRes KS is also considerably slower than regular ProRes. So, all right. Next up is the command that I cannot remember off the top of my head, so I will have to grab it from a batch file here. And that's changing the color space to one that ProRes can recognize. Now again, it won't add colors. What it will do is just shift it into the color space so that ProRes will recognize it as being in that color space. All right, so I'm just going to copy this and paste it in, and it is -pix _ FMT space YUV 422 P10LE. It's a 10-bit YUV 422 planar color space. Next, space and then -C:(A), and the audio codec that we're going to be using, which in this case will be PCM _ S16LE for 16-bit PCM audio. If for whatever weird reason you have like 20 or 24-bit audio, those are probably going to be pretty rare in standard definition video. Maybe like, again, if you were doing something with like a DVD source, then if you had a DTS audio track, that would be 20-bit audio. If you need to do that, then you would need to change this setting to PCM _ S24LE versus 16. All right. All right. Next up after that is the name of your output video file, which in this case I'm just going to call test.mov to make things consistent. And the one thing you really have to pay attention to here is you want to make sure that you're using the container that your video codec supports. Some video codecs can be supported in multiple containers. Others are only really workable within one container type. So in this case, I happen to know that ProRes only works in a QuickTime MOV container. So that's what I've selected here by doing .mov at the end of the file name. Okay, when that's done, save your batch file. The great thing is once you do this once, you will have it available and you can just kind of tweak individual things without having to remember this every time. Okay, so close it up. And if everything worked fine, then when you double click on the batch file, everything should just run. And it looks like it's doing that. Awesome. If you bring up your task manager, you will notice that you are now using 100% of your CPU power. If you notice less than that, then you probably forgot to include prefetch, or you were using ProRes KS or something. But in this case, I can tell you that without prefetch and the variant of ProRes that I'm using, I would be getting somewhere closer to the neighborhood of 10 frames per second rendering performance, whereas with this, I'm getting like 70. So, all right, I'm just going to leave this to run for a bit, and then when the rendering process is done, I will come back and we will finish up this tutorial. Okay. So let's double check now and make sure everything worked. Okay, that looks fine. Let's go through and see if we can find
maintain the status. Get it through the academy.
Yep, good.
California's got a huge increase of population in a short period of time, and our warden force has not kept up with that population.
All right, that's looking really good. So I think we're pretty done at this point. That's pretty much the basic process of setting everything up and creating the various scripts involved in this process. If you see a little file in here called FFindex with the same name as your video file, don't freak out. That's generated by FFMPEG Source when it first opens up your video file. It has to do that in order to ensure that it has frame accuracy when seeking and rendering. So if you have a really long file, it might take a sec to generate the first time that you open up or render something. Likewise, at the end of this, you now have two sort of boilerplate examples of AVISynth and FFMPEG scripts that you can adapt to other video files or to tweak and play around with other settings. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for staying around for this video. I realize it's still been a fairly long process here, but I really feel like it's important to show you guys how to install something from scratch here and to understand basically what each part of the process does. So if there's any sort of a need to troubleshoot something, you have at least a general idea of where to look. As I said in the advanced video, I will cover a bunch of other things that you can do with this. But for now, thanks so much. And if you like this video, give me a like. If you didn't like it, put a thumbs down. Although I really prefer that you just left a comment and let me know what you didn't like, or if there's something that you think was missing from this tutorial, and I might actually incorporate it into a future video. So constructive criticism will be very much appreciated. Non-constructive criticism will just be ignored. So anyway, until next time, happy video editing.